When we imagine time travel, our minds often drift to the wonders of the past. Some dream of witnessing dinosaurs in their prime, others of meeting historical figures like Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, or Leonardo da Vinci. Perhaps you'd like to stroll through the streets of ancient Rome, hear a bard in medieval Europe, or sail alongside explorers during the Age of Discovery. But here is the unsettling truth. For most of human history, and even before time travel would be more nightmare than dream. So which era stands out as the absolute worst to visit? To answer that, we need to explore the hazards of different ages. Prehistoric disasters, pandemics, famines, wars, and environments that would make survival nearly impossible. And while many moments in history were brutal, one period rises above the rest as the most unforgiving. But let's work our way there. First, let's eliminate the obvious candidates. The age of the dinosaurs seems immediately dangerous. Imagine arriving 100 million years ago, only to find yourself surrounded by towering predators, giant insects, and a climate far hotter and more humid than anything modern humans are adapted to. You'd lack immunity to ancient bacteria, the air composition might feel suffocating, and you'd be an easy snack for almost anything with teeth. Yet, if you manage to avoid predators and disease, you might at least find food and water. Dangerous, yes, but survivable for a brief time. What about the Ice Age? Traveling back 20,000 years places you in a world covered by massive glaciers, temperatures well below freezing, and megafauna like saber-toothed cats and mammoths roaming the tundra. Without specialized clothing or shelter, you'd freeze within hours. But again, if you prepared with the right gear, survival isn't completely out of reach. Moving closer to human civilization, the Middle Ages in Europe often get painted as a miserable era, full of war, poverty, and superstition. Life expectancy was low, diseases rampant, and medical knowledge limited. However, contrary to popular belief, medieval life wasn't unrelenting misery. There were periods of peace, trade, and even cultural flourishing. Harsh by modern standards, but not the absolute worst. Then there's the 14th century, infamous for the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, bubonic plague swept across Europe, killing up to half the population. Entire towns were wiped out, bodies filled the streets, and the terror of contagion hung over every interaction. Traveling to this period would almost certainly mean exposure to the plague, for which medieval medicine offered no cure. It's one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, but is it the worst time to travel to? Perhaps not, because at least some survived. Next, consider World War II. The years between 1939 and 1945 brought industrialized slaughter, bombings, genocide, and global destruction. Civilians in cities like London, Stalingrad, or Hiroshima faced unimaginable horrors. If you happen to time travel into a battle zone or an occupied territory, survival would be a gamble. Yet, unlike prehistoric times, humans still had communities, medicine, and systems of order. Catastrophic, yes, but survivable in some regions of the world. But what about before humans even existed? That's where things turned truly deadly. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, around 252 million years ago, earns the title, the Great Dying. It was the most catastrophic extinction in Earth's history, wiping out 90% of marine species and 70% of land animals. Volcanic eruptions spewed toxic gases, global temperatures soared, oxygen levels plummeted, and oceans turned acidic. Step into this era, and you'd struggle to breathe, roast under unrelenting heat, and likely die from poisonous air before you encountered a single animal. This was an Earth on the brink of lifelessness, a true hellscape. Another terrifying option is the Hadean Eon, over 4 billion years ago, when Earth itself was still forming. The surface was molten rock, asteroids crashed constantly, and there wasn't even an atmosphere to breathe. Traveling there would mean instant death, no questions asked. But perhaps that's too easy an answer. Of course, the very earliest Earth was uninhabitable. So let's refine the question. If we're thinking in terms of human survival, when was the worst era to time travel to where a person might expect to suffer the most? Many historians and scientists point to the 6th century CE, specifically the years around 536 CE, as the single worst time to be alive. What happened then? A massive volcanic eruption likely in Iceland spewed ash and aerosols into the atmosphere. For over a year, much of the world was plunged into a dim twilight. Accounts from the time describe the sun as faint, like the moon, casting little warmth. Temperatures plummeted, crops failed and famine swept across continents. In China, snow fell in the summer. In Europe and the Middle East, harvests rotted in the fields. Millions starved, but the misery didn't end there. The climate catastrophe triggered a cascade of disasters. In 541 CE, just a few years later, the plague of Justinian erupted, caused by the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death centuries later. It spread rapidly through the Byzantine Empire, killing tens of millions. Combined with famine, political upheaval, and economic collapse, this period marks one of humanity's lowest points. Historians argue that if you dropped into the mid-6th century, your odds of survival were slim, no matter where you landed. And this makes sense when we think about worst in human terms. Sure, prehistoric Earth had hostile environments, but they weren't tailored to kill humans specifically. We simply didn't exist yet. But in 536 CE, human society had already developed agriculture, cities, and trade. When those collapsed, so did the lifelines that people depended on. In many ways, the suffering was more acute because people had something to lose. So, what's the verdict? While any number of time periods would be miserable to visit, the Great Dying of the Permian, the Black Death, or even the trenches of World War I, the mid-6th century stands out as the worst period to time travel to. The world was shrouded in darkness. Famine and plague swept the globe, and humanity reeled under the weight of disaster. This conclusion also offers a sobering reminder. We often romanticize the past, imagining adventure and wonder. But the truth is, most eras were marked by hardship, far beyond what we can comprehend today. The comforts and protections we take for granted, medicine, food security, stable climates are recent luxuries. Time travel might sound exciting, but for most destinations, it would be a one-way ticket to suffering. And so, the next time you dream of hopping in a time machine, ask yourself, are you ready for the diseases, disasters, and darkness that await? Because the past, while fascinating, was often a place where survival was anything but guaranteed.